remember the morning clearly, too clearly. The order came for us to advance, and as soon as we moved off, I saw what lay in front of us, a long valley, flanked on both sides with Russian guns. Anyone could see it was madness, but we rode all the same. The first shot came before we were halfway. A shell burst overhead, and I felt something strike my sleeve. A fragment. Scorching hot men were falling fast. Horses screamed, but the brigade went on as straight as on parade. The smoke ahead grew thicker, and when we were close enough, I could see the gunners, men in grey coats, ramming home their charges. They fired straight into us. I saw a trooper to my right lifted clean out of the saddle by a round shot. When we reached the guns, I cut at a Russian who was trying to load again. It was chaos then, shouting, sabres ringing, men firing pistols in each other's faces. The smoke was choking. I could hardly see my own regiment. My horse was hit twice. The second shot brought him down. I went over his head and landed hard. Before I could get up, a Russian lunged at me with his bayonet, but one of the 13th cut him down. I ran until I found another horse, riderless and trembling. I mounted him bareback and galloped back through the valley. Russian cavalry came down on us, but a few of us stuck close together and fought our way out. When I reached our lines, I looked back at that valley. I still cannot understand how any man came out of it alive.
When the order reached us to charge, we could hardly believe it. We expected to be sent to support the heavy brigade or to threaten the guns on the heights. But straight down the valley. It seemed impossible. Still, when the bugle sounded, we lowered our lances and went forward. The fire opened on us immediately. Shot and shell ploughed through our ranks. I saw lances, helmets, and whole men flung into the air. But the pace increased, and soon we were in full gallop. I kept my eyes fixed on the guns ahead. One Russian battery was firing continuously, the smoke rolling out in sheets. As we drew nearer, the ground shook under the volleys. We hit the guns like a thunderbolt. I remember thrusting my lance through a gunner who was trying to run. Then a blow struck my arm, a musket butt, and nearly knocked me from the saddle. The melee was terrible, horses rearing, men slashing, the roar of cannon and musket all around. We passed right through the guns and found ourselves among Russian cavalry. They came at us from all sides. I broke my lance and took to my sabre. Somehow a group of us carved a way through them. I don't know how. It was all instinct and desperation. The ride back was worse than the charge. The Russians chased us hard, and the valley was strewn with our own dead and dying. I rejoined what remained of my regiment. What little remained. We stood in silence, stunned by what we had survived. Half an hour had changed the brigade forever.
I saw at once that the order meant destruction. We were to charge straight into a valley lined with artillery. I said to Lord Cardigan as much, but he merely replied, "We have our orders." So forward we went. The fire we rode into was beyond anything I had imagined. Shot tore through our ranks, shell burst above us, and still the brigade held its formation. How they managed it I shall never comprehend. When we neared the guns, I shouted for the men to close in. The Russian artillery fired directly into our faces. It was like riding into the very mouth of hell. At the first battery, I cut down a gunner who was aiming a pistol at me, but almost at once my horse was struck and fell. I was thrown violently, stunned, and before I could rise I was surrounded by Russian infantry. I fought as best I could, but I received several wounds. In the head, shoulder, and leg I was taken prisoner, bleeding heavily. The Russians did not treat me harshly. One even bound my wounds with his own scarf. As I lay in their lines, I watched the remnant of our brigade galloping back through the valley, pursued and fired upon the entire way. It was the most glorious folly I have ever witnessed. No soldiers ever showed greater bravery or suffered such needless loss.
I was in the front line when the order came. At first, none of us believed it. We thought perhaps we were to move to the right or left, but the pointing of the officers' swords made it plain enough. Straight ahead, down the valley, into the guns. We went forward at a trot, then a canter. The guns on both sides opened almost at once. You could hear the screams of horses before the men cried out. A shell burst right above our troop and brought down 3 horses together. They fell in a heap, and their riders were thrown clear or crushed. Still we kept our line. The smoke grew so thick that we could hardly see the squadrons beside us. Through the haze, I could just make out the Lancers lowering their points and the 13th riding as steadily as if on drill. Then the guns in front of us flashed all at once. A blaze of fire that seemed to run along the whole Russian battery. Men vanished from the saddle without a sound. Others spun as if struck by a hammer. We broke into a gallop. I felt my horse trembling under me, but he went on bravely. When we were close to the guns, I saw a round shot strike the ground in front of us and ricochet straight through our ranks. It took off a man's leg to my right and killed his horse outright. Then we were at the guns. The crash was terrible. Horses leaping over gun carriages, sabres flying, men shouting and firing pistols. I saw a Russian gunner try to drag a cannon round to fire point blank. One of our officers cut him down before he could pull the lanyard. We fought among the guns for what felt like minutes, but can only have been seconds. Then the Russian cavalry came at us from the rear and the sides, a great mass of them. The order to retire was lost in the smoke and din, but instinct told us to break out or die. Where we stood, I turned my horse and forced my way through a knot of Russian troopers. One of them slashed at me and glanced my helmet. Another thrust at my leg with his lance, but it slid off my boot. The ride back was a nightmare. The valley was littered with the dead, our own men, our horses, some still alive and screaming. The guns on the heights fired at us all the while. I felt the shock as something tore past my arm. A bullet or a splinter. When I finally reached our lines, I looked around for the rest of my troop. Half were gone. Simply gone. We had ridden into a furnace and somehow come out again, though not as the men who had gone in. To this day, I can still hear the sound the guns made when we were close enough to see the fire leap from their mouths.